I think one of our primary requests was to at least have a contingent of people go in to inspect the areas of Homan Square that...
It's not open for tours?
Are there currently any civilians being held in here right now?
Not to my knowledge.
Not to your knowledge. How can we verify that?
And I'm not here to discuss. Nobody's being held here right now.
On paper, right?
Hey.
Okay, we're blocking the street here. So
Were there any detainees that were moved out of here in preparation for this rally? Were there any civilians that were taken to a different facility?
No.
Or?
Thank you, sorry.
How long have you been here today yourself?
I work here every day.
Okay. What time did you start your shift today?
I don't recall, 10 o'clock.
Okay. Just wanted to get the idea of the notion of how you knew no one had been shipped out.
Louisiana. Folks across the street, you can exercise your First Amendment rights over here too, you know, and be closer to the object of what we're protesting here today. Your First Amendment right. You exercise it or you give it away. Constitution. Yeah.
What are we doing here? We're trying to, first of all, we're trying to get a public inspection of Homan Square. We've already submitted that request. It's been denied once, and it's going to probably be denied several times throughout the day. We've also submitted a request to the News Affairs Department at the Chicago Police Department. That request is for there to be a public meeting within 10 days that will be called that would allow the public to attend, a town hall style meeting that allow the public to attend to ask tough questions about what's going on inside Homan Square. Because right now they're telling us basically that it's the supervisors that make these decisions about whether we would get access and that sort of thing, and they're sort of going up the chain of command and referring us there, but of course not giving us any phone numbers or people to really contact.
This story has been reported in two reputable publications, The Guardian and The Atlantic, but they're publications outside the city of Chicago.
Right.
About newspapers and other media inside corporate media in Chicago. Is there any reporting on this?
Not that I've seen at all, and I put out a lot of posts and things over the last few days to try to get in contact with people who might have stories about Homan Square. I got, The Guardian and The Intercept and a couple other journalists outside of Chicago got in contact with me, but no one inside of Chicago has gotten in contact with anybody that's tried to organize this. So I think that Chicago, the Chicago Tribune and the Chicago Sun-Times, I think that they're basically republishing the police department's press releases instead of doing serious investigations into what's going on here and asking tough questions.
Well, a black site simply is a place that's not acknowledged to even exist. So that nobody, it might be known to those right around it, but nobody admits it, nobody recognizes it, there's no oversight. In this case, it's like comparable CIA operations in the Middle East. They just don't exist. So in other words, somebody could be detained by the Chicago Police Department. Nobody knows. It doesn't go into the central booking system. So lawyers can't find clients. Clients can't get their lawyers. There's no constitutional rights. It's a total abrogation of the Constitution. It is totally illegal, and it should be condemned. And our politicians and our media have done nothing about it, and it's despicable. And I think every politician running for office should have to state their position on this and demand that it be closed and demand it not happen again.
You're in there torturing people without giving them a Miranda rights, without giving them any justice. We say enough is enough. You need to stop the police brutality and the criminalization of our generation now. This ends now.
Anybody want to talk?
I think a lot of people are rightfully ticked off that the police are apparently doing the same sort of things that they claimed they stopped doing with the start of the Emanuel administration. Here we are in the middle of another mayoral race with another mayor who's apparently covering up for police malpractice. This city paid out $50 million plus last year alone due to police misconduct. The city, and this is something that a lot of people don't know, the city in 2013 settled a class action lawsuit for $16.5 million so as to stop them from abusing people in the overnight lockups at the regular CPD stations. Things like sleep deprivation, things like handcuffing people to the walls of interrogation rooms for hours on end, things like denial of access to restrooms. These are the sort of things that just a little under 2 years ago, the city paid out $16.5 million to stop happening in the regular police lockups. So to find out that they're operating an off-the-books site here, and thus potentially setting up the city for millions of dollars more in wrongful police misconduct lawsuits is just absurd. We're a city that's swimming in red ink. We're a city that has the third highest cop per capita ratio of any city over 50,000 people in the nation, according to the FBI. And yet our mayoral candidates are talking about hiring more cops when we already see, thanks to things like Homan Square here, the misconduct on display, the $50 million paid out last year, the police misconduct on display. These cops who go and kill people cannot just get the pass that they do from State's Attorney Anita Alvarez. We need genuine civilian control of these cops.
We've been fighting to stop police brutality. While there were protests going on in New York and protests going on in Ferguson, we organized protests across the city in Chicago against police brutality. Because the issue is not just that police brutality happened in Ferguson and in New York, but that it's a systemic issue. It's happening all across the country and nothing is being done about it. The fact that police officers have more rights than the lives of, or than the citizens have to their lives in America. You know, we call ourselves a democracy, but you know, what's going on in America today proves otherwise. I mean, what's going on here at the black site behind me is that people are being tortured. We received intel that people are being tortured on the inside, where they're not being read their Miranda rights, where they're not receiving the rights to an attorney. They're being tortured for hours, some beaten, some killed, and so we're saying enough is enough, and so we have to stand up. If we don't stand up for ourselves, no one else will.
Well, I think it's outrageous that Emanuel, of course, promised 1,000 more cops, and unfortunately Chuy Garcia repeated that ridiculous demand in the current race. And yet, to my knowledge, neither of them have spoken out substantively about investigating Homan Square, getting an independent investigation team in here, shutting it down until that's done. I mean, there are plenty of police lockups. We're stone's throw from the Harrison District Police Station here. Why do they have to take people to a black site? That's the question that Chuy needs to be asking. That's what all the opposition aldermanic candidates need to be saying is, why is Rahm Emanuel operating a black site on the west side of Chicago when he could be taking these people to regular district police stations, getting them checked in there, rather than trying to evade the Dunn class action settlement of 2013. That's essentially, I believe, what they're doing here. Chuy has got an opportunity to finally step in front of the news rather than trail the news on this one. He trailed the news with a stupid demand for 1,000 more cops in the city that's already got more cops than most any other city in the nation.
We specifically invited Chuy, and he said no. So I mean, this is an international story, and he can't be bothered to travel to his own, to the west side of his own city that he wants to become mayor of to give his comments on an international story. So that was very disappointing to us, basically.
First of all, Rahm Emanuel, who's the current mayor, has done nothing about this. This has happened on his watch, as well as his predecessor, Richard M. Daley. Emanuel should be made to explain about this, and Emanuel's been evading this. Chuy Garcia, on the other hand, has not dealt with it as far as I know. He's talked about adding 1,000 cops. Great, thank you so much. you know, for most people in this city, especially if you're black or brown and also poor white, the cops aren't our friends. We don't need more cops.
I stand with you wholeheartedly to call for an investigation to the lives that have been tortured by this facility. We hear a lot what goes on in our neighborhood, and in some cases we've stopped marching. We stopped fighting for those that matter. And I'm an alderman that stands for the people that have been forgotten about. It's easy to go in the boardroom to conduct business, but it's hard to be out on the street and fight for the common folk that we forget about, but they make up the majority of this population. In the 24th Ward, 80 to 90% of the African American men have X's on their background, and they deserve not just a second chance, but another chance, and it's up to us to make sure that they have it.
Less than 2 years ago, in a case called Dunn versus the City of Chicago, the Chicago Police Department and City of Chicago paid out $16.5 million in a class action precisely designed to stop the sort of practices that have been reported in the building behind us here. Things like handcuffing defendants to the walls of interrogation rooms for hours on end. Things like not charging them for many, many hours and denying them access to their attorneys. Things like not allowing them access to toilet facilities and food. Those were the kind of conditions that the City of Chicago paid out $16.5 million less than 2 years ago, practices that were and probably still are common in regular Chicago police lockups. So excuse us when we get a little upset when we find out that there's an off-the-books site, which isn't even subject to the kind of monitoring that we saw in the case of the Dunn versus City of Chicago class action lawsuit. Excuse us if we're a little bit upset for a city that just paid out $16.5 million in that one suit, and last year paid out over $50 million for police misconduct in a city that's swimming in red ink. Excuse us if we're a little bit upset, not just about that money, but the continuing pattern of police misconduct and, yes, brutality that we have seen with the deaths of young black men in our city over the last several months. Rahm Emanuel says, trust us. We're doing the right thing. I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, but you've lied to us about enough other things that we're not going to just take your word for it, that things are just fine and hunky-dory in the building behind us here.
Now, I was doubtful of any story that I read on the internet. You know, that's common sense. So I, of course, was skeptical about the Guardian's article. And I was looking forward to seeing Chicago Police Department's response. And when I read it, it was very bland. And, you know, their main point was on the use of the Guardian's word of black site. And they said that because the public has access to this building to reattain their confiscated items, that it's not a black site because it's a public building. The public is allowed. That is not true. The definition of a black site is basically where dark black ops are created away from public eye in a government building. That's what it is. It doesn't matter if we have access to this building or not. The point is that there are black, off-the-books records going on in there. And we want to find out if that's true. That's what we're here for, to investigate. CPD, the world is watching you. The country is watching you. You should have expected us.
All right.
That's all I have to say.